morning, I'd like to call to order this work session of the Southampton Town Board on this 26th day of August 2021. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Supervisor Schneiderman.
Here.
Councilwoman Lofstad. Here. Councilman Martell.
Here.
Councilman Bouvier.
Here.
Councilman Schiavone.
Present.
All right, gang is all here. All right, we're going to start today with the discussion of the proposed Shinnecock Hills Cultural Resources Protection Overlay District. What does that mean? This is really a continuation of our efforts to protect cultural resources, particularly unmarked graves. And we put a moratorium in place, if you recall, which I guess has expired. Sort of expired, but over certain areas in the Shinnecock Hills. We've done all kinds of land preservation as well, but we were concerned that if you were building a single-family home, that there was no requirement for you to do any archaeology in what we know is a sensitive area. So we've been putting together a code provision that would trigger archaeological review when somebody is either building a brand new house or a substantial addition, or in some cases even a swimming pool, depending upon how sensitive the area is, how likely it is to find potential burials. So with that, am I going to Janice first? All right, so Janice is going to introduce this and take you through this. I'm gearing up to introduce a resolution and hold a public hearing on this law. So I want to make sure the board has had input in it before I do that. So,
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board. I'm Janice Scherer, Town Planning and Development Administrator. I'm joined here with Director of Planning, Dave Wilcox, who's really going to go through the nuts and bolts of the code, but just from a kind of higher level, 30,000 foot view. As the supervisor said, we looked at moratorium A and B areas, and Dave will be handing out that map. This was the area where we actually instituted a moratorium and said, you really can't do anything until we think this through in these particular areas. Then, at the same time, the board hired archaeological assessment done by our town archaeologist, Joanne McLean, to do a Phase 1A study. And this is the results of, this is the map of her Phase 1A, sorry Dave, her 1A study, which you'll see these blue lines around various areas outside of the moratorium areas. And those are where there's some documentary evidence that there may be, Jay has a couple extra he can pass down, that there may be sensitive sites in those locations. So we structured the code to, of course, we wanted to capture moratorium areas A and B, and then it's really at the board's discretion whether or not you want to start there or expand it out into these other areas, which we'll go through. So it's really dependent on, her recommendation is to do all these areas. Our recommendation is start where you feel comfortable. We could get the ball rolling on areas A and B and expand out. We wrote the code to be able to capture all of this, but we just, want to go through it first, and so you understand the nuts and bolts. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dave to talk about how this works in practicality. So somebody wants to come to the building department and they just want a permit for whatever they're looking to do. What do we say to them? What are they going to be expected to do, and how is it going to work? And that's what Dave's going to go through right now.
Yep.
Thank you, Dave.
All right. So the way we structured it, and Jay kind of touched on that, was that depending on the sensitivity of the area, there were different thresholds that would trigger the need for archaeological assessment. And the code, so we have these different sub-areas. We have sub-area A and B. Sub-area A is the same as moratorium area A, and sub-area B is the same as moratorium area B. Moratorium area B includes the Sugarloaf Hill area. You can see on the map it's the area to the far right, to the west end of moratorium area B. And the reason that's a smaller area on the map is because right now we already have that on the books as a critical environmental area. So setting up different thresholds depending on the sensitivity We felt that sub-area B was more sensitive because it does include the Sugarloaf Hill area. So in sub-area B, the thresholds, well, before I get into the thresholds, the way this would work is if you come in for a building permit, building department checks the zoning map because these are going to be overlay districts on the zoning map. They'll also be flagged in GIS so that building permit comes in, the reviewer looks at the property on GIS, it pops up as being in a cultural resource area, and that automatically triggers the need for what we're calling a site disturbance plan. It can be done very simply. It doesn't have to be done by a surveyor. It can be done by your builder, but it does have to be based on a survey. It has, drawn from a survey, a boundary survey. And the site disturbance plan would show the areas on this property that you're going to disturb for the construction of a new house, the construction of a pool, driveways, things like that. On this site disturbance plan, you also have to indicate how deep you're digging, what the square footage of the excavation is, location of clearing of trees or regrading. Maybe you're going to regrade the back of your property. You've got a little hill, you're going to regrade it, and you're going to bring the grade down 5 feet or 3 feet. So you have to describe all of this on your site disturbance plan. That disturbance plan gets submitted to the building department with your building permit application and is then referred to the planning division. Planning division will review the disturbance plan to determine if you're exceeding any of these thresholds. If you're exceeding so for sub-area A, which is moratorium area A, which is referred to in the moratorium as the fort, the Shinnecock Indian fort,
Settlement area.
the contact period fort. So in that area, if you're doing an excavation of greater than 50 cubic yards, or you're building a new house, or you're within 500 feet of an area identified as sensitive in the 1A, which is
These
this map
data
shows
points.
the areas from the 1A assessment, you would have to do an archaeological assessment. If you're in sub-area B, the Sugarloaf Hill area, the thresholds are a little bit lesser because it's more sensitive. So if you're doing any type of excavation greater than 1 foot, or the square footage of your excavation is greater than 10 square feet, even if you're only doing a half a foot, but if you're doing 10 square feet, or you're doing a new house, or you're doing a disturbance within 500 feet of a sensitive area, you'd have to do an archaeological assessment.
Now,
So-
the archaeological assessments, now we did the Phase 1A for the whole town. So
Right,
we-
and let me
yeah,
explain what,
yeah.
Phase 1A is a literature search. So our town archaeologist searched all the records in the state museum, all the archaeological reports filed with the Suffolk County Archaeological Association, and all the archaeological reports filed with SHPO. So there's quite a number of reports and archaeological finds that people have reported to the state and to the different agencies. So the 1A does a full literature search of all the available information on these discoveries and finds and puts it into the report. Did we distribute the 1A? I have.
So people won't have to do a 1A because it's
Right.
already done.
Done.
Correct.
So we
You go
did
right
that for
to
everyone.
100%.
That's where we came up with the 500 feet of something, because it's from that report.
So I thought in terms of moratorium area B, the Sugarloaf Hill, which is the black line there,
Right.
there obviously anything is subject to archaeological review. But in the other balance of the moratorium B area, I thought we were only being triggered if you were within 500 feet of a known culturally sensitive find.
Well, that's why we're here. So we may have gotten that incorrect. And so we could make it, the yellow line kind of follow this down the black line, and this whole.
Yeah, that was my
becomes A.
understanding, because, some of the property owners.
And this is really B.
Didn't understand why, when they're not in Sugarloaf, why we're making them do this, and, I said, well, we did find human remains on Hawthorne in this area, but they said, well, that doesn't mean that there's been random finds all over the town, it doesn't, it just seemed logical that area B, right below the fort area, as you head to the water, would be sensitive, but, so I thought that maybe we'd have this 500-foot trigger.
Well, that's, so sub-areas, the rest of, like, if we were to expand this out, we have other criteria, which is really not as sensitive as A and B, but just within 500 feet. So we can tailor this to that, and that's why we bring that up, that we've come to a point where we understand the process, but we have to understand, like, how you want to execute and where. So.
I mean, certainly maybe, a new home in this area really should do archaeology.
When you say this area, Jay, you're referring to?
Moratorium area B.
Moratorium area B,
outside
that's
of the black
outside,
line.
okay.
But
So-
I'm not sure, a garage addition or something, unless it's within a known, within a certain distance of a known find.
Well, and I have a question about that. So like you said, a garage addition, if you're not digging some sort of foundation, if you're just pouring a slab, would you have to do any of this?
You'd have to just do that simple site disturbance plan that Dave described with your building permit application. And then we've devised an internal process where, so the building department is like ministerial in that sense, like it's pretty black and white. So when we start getting into like, well, the gray areas, we prefer to go to planning, where those nuances, they're accustomed to reading these reports and reviewing these things, so we just go to planning. Planning would be able to say, that's fine, kick it back, permit can be issued. If it needs to go to phase 1B, which is the where you put the grid and you actually have to test hole, that then generates a report that goes to planning. They read these reports, 99% of the, 99.5% of the time, those reports don't really
Not much, right?
conclude that there's going to be a problem. Permit is issued. But when you then if you did find something in those test pits, we just follow the state standards on how to proceed. Phase 2, then so it seems lengthy, but when you get to a point where you're finding things, that we just defer to the state standards in those cases.
Right, when you start actually getting investigations that are finding things like, stage 2 or stage 3, then there's going to have to be hard decisions on, okay, what do we do on this property to preserve whatever is found? Is
So
there an accurate?
does the draft law state the professional standards?
Yes.
For which the work has to be done at, whatever the
Yes.
grid
What's it called?
size is?
It's all based on the,
Do you have I don't know if I have a copy.
oh,
of that.
Yep.
could hand it out.
You-
I just wanted to make it clear that we have sub-areas C and D here, but we don't know that you want to expand it out at this time. Like, the code was really meant to be moratorium areas A and B, but we added in sub-areas C and D, which are larger,
The sensitive areas.
but they reflect the Phase 1A findings,
All right, so can we just kind of sort of go through the whole thing? So the first section is the legislative intent. I think we all understand what we're trying to accomplish. All right, so the next section is cultural resource protection overlay district. And, all right, so you have protection area A, protection area B, and multiple area C, and then multiple area D.
Right.
So C is areas of sensitivity identified in the Phase 1A Cultural Resources Survey of Shinnecock Hills.
Right.
That's the 1A that
This
Joanne
kinda-
McLean
see
did.
these
Well-
white areas on this map? You could see the moratorium
I've got
areas.
it here.
Oh, that's.
What I took the map from the 1A, and because they're just kind of blobs and you can't define them, I tried to correlate those to actual tax parcels and to roads.
Okay,
So,
oh, good.
which we could put on a zoning map.
All right, good. And then, the last area is the Town of Southampton Historic Cemetery list.
Yeah,
Right.
the town has an inventory of about 57 cemeteries.
So the idea then, if you're right adjacent to a cemetery, the boundaries could be incorrect, and so therefore do archaeology?
These- And the cemeteries also occur on private properties in some cases.
Well, and the way this is written, the cemetery has to be on your property in order to trigger the need for a site disturbance plan.
Okay,
If you're doing something and your neighbor has a private cemetery on their property, you don't have to do any sort of assessment. Although we could write it so that surrounding properties,
well, this is good. So, so this is for,
So the cover map shows the overall, all of the sensitive areas that would be in sub-area C. If you open up the pages, I zoomed in on the different areas so that you can kind of get a sense for the number of properties, the amount of development that's occurring, and the numbers on those subsequent pages match the general number areas on the cover page.
all right, so the Sugarloaf and Fort Hill area are not on this map, right?
They are, but they're the orange and yellow areas on the cover page.
Oh, I see, that's the 3 and the 4.
3 and 4, yeah.
Yeah, 4. right.
Okay, and I'm not seeing even where number 1 is, but
1 is a little tiny area
above 2?
above 2, correct.
1, 2,
Sugarloaf is the eastern part of 4.
Yeah.
I guess 8 is that tiny little,
Yeah, 8 is the
I
Parish
see it.
Pond.
oh, I see it.
It was part of the subdivision of Parish Pond. There was an archaeological dig that was done there. There were-
Right, I'm seeing the numbers now.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump ahead, but what would be sub-area D?
Sub-area D, and I didn't give a map of that because I didn't have time to get it together, but we would take the list of cemetery properties that the town has on their website already, of historic cemeteries, and those that are occurring on private property. We're not talking about the existing cemeteries, functioning, operating cemeteries. We're not looking at those. We're not looking at the historic cemeteries that the town has taken title to, like the Watermill Cemetery, the Hayground Cemetery, all the old colonial cemeteries that have come into ownership by the town because they've been abandoned and they're inactive. We're talking about abandoned, inactive, private family cemeteries on private properties.
How did-
There's maybe 10 of those. There aren't a lot, and they tend to be very small, 2 or 3 stones.
But we should just account for them because you don't want someone going, oh, I'm gonna buy this property and build this house, and then the next thing you know, there was, 3 graves there.
Is the Shinnecock Hills Golf Course didn't fall into any of this, huh?
No, it's very strange that,
That's odd to me because the Shinnecocks have often maintained that that is culturally sensitive.
apparently there have never been any archaeological investigations of that property that discovered anything. The really significant areas were the Sabonic areas up by National that were done in the 20s, where they found the remains of villages, and it was one of the first, if you get a chance to read the 1A that Joanne did, it talks about that study extensively. But I was very surprised that no part of, well, there is a small part of Shinnecock Gulf that is in one of the sensitive areas, but most of it is outside any historically sensitive area.
So continuing on, so those are the areas, and then we get to definitions, and then,
And then you mentioned the state standards, and it says on the next page after definitions, it says New York State Standards for Cultural Resource Investigations. And we actually say, standards established by New York Archaeological Council and
Yeah.
adopted by New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation as may be amended time to time. And we even have a web link, so you can click on there and it goes, so we just at least are starting with, the adopted state standards.
So this is kind of an incremental approach.
Yes.
Up to the New York State standards, which then take over.
Right, well, they don't take over, but you're getting quality work when the archaeologist has to follow the state
New York
standard.
State, okay.
Yeah, so you know that you're getting like across the board, same, level playing field type thing.
But
Right,
we're
so-
we're starting right off at the state
Yeah, we're starting right off with
standards.
the state
A
standard.
Phase 1A,
Well, that-
or a Phase 1B, which would be the first phase that a property owner would have to do if they had to do it. There are state standards for that, and you have to be a registered archaeologist with New York State in order to perform these, so.
So we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just doing something up front here. If someone wants to come in and do some work, that it's clearly understood what their responsibility is.
so what I would do here is on Sugarloaf, let's say that, I'll just draw it here. So this becomes 4,
Yep.
this becomes part of 2, whatever, The same, or 3, whatever, but it's the same rules.
Okay.
That's fine.
Well, just going back to that, Jay, and that makes sense, because there really isn't much difference between the western end of the Sugarloaf Hill moratorium area and the moratorium area A.
Right.
Right,
And you're, yeah.
It's hard to justify why it's extra work
Right.
there.
outside of that real condensed sugar.
Right, well, we have the Hawthorne, so if you're within 500 feet of that, you're,
Yeah.
Correct.
and you have another, there's a cemetery along the railroad tracks up in here, maybe it's on the other side of the canal, no, I think it's in here, right, in the 2. There's a little park there.
Coffee,
Yeah,
that's on the other side of the canal. That's-
that's on the Hampton Bay side, okay. So, all right, so I'm now at the chart, and it's sort of telling me if I'm in A, B, C, or D, and in A, which is,
A is the moratorium area A, or it used to be
oh,
moratorium.
so that's Fort Hill, and that's got its, anything greater than 50 cubic yards, new home construction or okay.
B is really going to be limited now.
Right, so
To
B
what you
is
just
gonna
said,
just
the
be-
black area, that was already that box of
B,
Sugarloaf.
B is going to be Sugarloaf, so that's really any minor
Right.
excavation will be triggered, archaeology will be triggered.
Any minor excavation, a new house, or...
And in these other areas, it's if you're within 500 feet,
Right,
C and D
yep.
of,
And actually, sub-area A, I don't know if you want to eliminate the greater than 50 cubic yards and just, or maybe you want to have greater than 50 cubic yards also apply in sub-area C.
Well, the problem I have with cubic yards is you have cubic yards of 3-inch over a volume as opposed to a depth.
That's true.
I mean, so in the moratorium area, in the moratorium we put in this area, this contact period, fort area, I think we said it would only apply to new home construction. So now we're saying, 50 cubic yards would be more than just new home construction. It would be an addition if they were expanding the foundation of a house.
Basically putting in a
A
basement or a
swimming
pool.
Or a
pool.
pool.
Swimming pool, so I would leave that there, but
Or what about water management?
and anything within 500 feet of something that's been identified. So if they're doing less excavation, but it's near a known find,
So take the 50 cubic yards out of sub-area A?
no, I'd leave it
Oh,
there.
leave it, okay.
Or within 500 feet, or new home construction.
Okay.
So,
But you
any of
might
those.
define it, that's my question was that, I can take 50 cubic yards in a 1-inch increment off the surface of my property as
So you
opposed
really
to a
need
depth.
depth in there.
I think depth is
More than-
important
I
in
think
this
you're right.
case.
I think depth is important.
So greater than some depth,
Yeah,
that is also greater than 50 cubic
right,
yards.
because it's easy to bypass all of that
10
just by,
feet, like
You're
that's
saying something less than 50 cubic yards, but deep?
not necessarily less, but if you could scrape 50 cubic yards off your lawn,
Sod in.
Just,
right? Yeah.
to resod.
So
So
how,
I-
how deep do you want to put the standard is the question. then.
We're using 1 foot in the Sugarloaf Hill area, so I don't think you want to have the same 1 foot depth.
No, I think it's actually probably depth with,
10 feet?
I'm thinking
5 feet?
5 to 10 feet.
What's the standard depth they've found items at? Or is it all different depths?
It's all different.
Yeah,
For
Anything beyond 6 feet?
If you're trying to
I mean, that's
protect
pretty deep.
it
information
is.
from the habitation period, then it's going to be very close to the surface, If it's burials will be a little bit deeper,
Right.
but if there's information that could be gained, close to the surface.
And it depends on the particular archaeological site you're talking about. If it's Native American versus colonial, there might be a difference in depth that people are buried and how all that works. So, you got to consider all sides of that. It's a
3 feet?
Right, right.
It's kind of arbitrary to some degree, but we have to come up with some kind of
Somebody's
number.
moving
Right.
50 cubic yards, even if they're just scraping the surface, it sounds like they should do some review.
I think so, yeah.
So then I
It's
wouldn't specify a depth there.
Well, what if they're moving 30 cubic yards but going down 6
Going
feet?
down 6 feet.
It's, you know.
You don't have any depth on
Right.
So I like 5 feet, you know, and I'm just,
Or excavation of, what if it just putting a pole in 5 feet deep? A well in?
Well, yeah.
Well, you put a well in, you're gonna have to dig a fairly deep hole.
Well, you're not digging, you're
You're-
just pounding a
You're
well.
pounding a well.
You're
I
drilling,
don't mind
basically. what you're doing.
putting in or a
it's a cool method.
depth below 5 feet, but it has to be a big, it can't just be a tiny little hole. It's got to be something broader.
I believe the 1Bs, when they do the grids, I think they go down 4 feet. So,
So is this derived from the New York State Archaeological?
no, these were standards that we,
What other sources do we have that have had experience with that we could ask that question?
Yeah, it's probably, instead of us guessing, we should probably go back and do a little more research.
Right.
on-
Why don't you leave for now, why don't we leave it at greater than 50 cubic yards? And then if you want to require in that moratorium area, the contact area, something more stringent, you
Better to err on the
come up
side
with
of
it.
caution, in my view.
Come up with a recommendation, I'm open, even after the law gets introduced, we can still modify it.
Okay.
And we
Yeah,
may
as long
wanna-
as we get some kind of
This is better.
closure
than-
on that.
This
Is
is better
50
than what we.
cubic yards like one dump truck full? I need to get a visual, because like,
50,
what was it?
where's this?
When we had this.
is that a
our
dump
meeting.
truck full?
Five dumpsters.
Five?
Five.
Green dumpsters, by
Yeah.
understanding,
Yeah.
maybe like five.
20-yard
Okay,
dumpsters,
thank you.
There's 10-yard, 20-yard dumpsters.
Yeah, so, yeah, often those big dumpsters at construction sites are
Or
20-yard containers, so if you have to fill 2.5 of those,
Okay,
it's a lot of dirt.
thank you.
I mean, it's
I'm a
We should
visual.
probably
It is, but
consider.
if you're talking about regrading, which is part of some of your discussion here, you can talk about regrading your property and other things like that, that may be very applicable. So I think there needs to be some focus on that carefully.
We should also consider exemptions for water wells or in all of these districts, if, you know,
Well, people don't get building
Yeah,
permits
you
for
don't need
water
a-
walls.
okay,
Yeah.
good, then they're exempt.
Yeah.
Because if they need a new well, we wouldn't want them to have.
So, yeah, again, originally in
'Cause
that
that's a
area in
health issue.
Fort
Okay,
Hill,
good.
it was just new houses, so now it's, if you're still building a new house, you have to do it. But also, if you're doing something else, not necessarily building a new house, but it involves, what did we say, 50 cubic yards?
Right.
And we can make it, pick a number, 40 cubic yards, 30 cubic yards.
Well, a lot of that area is served by the Hampton Bays Water District or not? No, it's not actually in it. Or part of it is, but part of it isn't. So
Yeah.
what would happen with, like, say, Suffolk County Water Authority wanting to put water into the area or dig main? Do we have the authority over them if they have to come to us?
This law doesn't capture
Okay.
work by other agencies.
Or in
government
the right of
agencies.
way, really.
Yeah, or like electric.
We can write
power,
that in
what
there.
kind of
We
thing.
can say, that's a good exemption, you know.
Yeah, or.
Unless you
or-
want a site disturbance plan. for the
I
right
think
of
they
way.
should be acutely aware that they're in an area that we consider archaeologically sensitive, and I don't know, just asking the question.
It's a good question, I don't have an
We
answer.
probably have to do it under seeker somehow, so that any state agency that's doing work in a right-of-way would be subject to seeker.
I mean, it does seem to make sense if you're burying a power line by Sugarloaf that you are doing archaeology.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
but also if you're going, if you have yeah, maybe.
Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe I'm too optimistic. I lost the train of thought I was having. If the New York State rules apply, for archaeological rules apply, would they not apply to an agency like Suffolk County Water or PSEG or?
It's not even really rules, it's just
Standards.
professional standards.
Right.
So maybe they dig a lot. Maybe they have some way of handling that.
We had PSEG come about different things, and they did do assessments, so
yeah.
they
Yeah.
have done
They've
it.
done
That's
it,
what
they
I
do
thought.
archaeological, yeah.
They
Yeah.
will do it.
Yeah.
It's worth
So, but we can put a little line
A
in there
reference
about
to
that,
that.
referencing
Okay.
any agency, that's fine.
All right, so then continuing on with this, so that's the matrix there. And then you outline what Phase 1B cultural resource investigation, so that's, 1A is already pre-done. Does it say that 1A is pre-done?
It does,
Yep.
in the definitions.
Okay, so all they have to do is that it's 1B, and it says the standards.
And also, we added the same notification standard that we have in our subdivision when we get applications, a notification requirement to Shinnecock Nation. So we added that in there, so they would be notified by the property owner.
So then you guys at the planning department would determine whether Phase 2 was necessary?
It's not even that we determine it, it's that somebody read the report, and the report has recommendations, and the archaeologist makes recommendations, and then the planning department who read the report would say, look, it says you have to do this now, and they would, work with the property owner to do that.
So it has a basis in.
Yeah,
in
so it's never,
professional-
or the report says, it's fine, and the planning department gives it back to the building department, says, okay to issue permit.
And now
And they
that,
send the copy of the report to the Shinnecock Nation also.
yeah, I'm noticing that.
So they're both getting notified by the property owner and a copy of the archaeological report in this.
There is the
case.
ability, if the planning division thought maybe there was something weird about the report, we could consult with an archaeologist, we could forward it to SHPO and say, do you agree with these findings? But usually, we're taking the archaeologists at their word, their professional experience, and their recommendations. And, if they think there's something worth doing more investigation, they will put that in their conclusions. And they'll say, we recommend doing a stage 2 or stage 3.
Which sounds like that's the way it should be.
And that's how we do subdivisions. The
Yeah.
planning department reads the reports. If it recommends further study, the planning board requires further study.
Right, so in this case, and that's an important point, where it's not making someone have to go to the planning board, though. So the planning department reviews it, and then it could be a ministerial act by me, because I also have that administrative review power, so they're not stuck now going to the planning board. It could be me, where it comes to me, and I sign off, and then it goes to the permit.
And that's based on professional archaeological
Yeah, oh, yeah,
reporting
yeah.
and all the rest of it, as we just discussed.
So we do 1A, that's been done by us, so the
Done.
homeowner or builder doesn't have to worry about it. What about Phase 1B, 2, and 3? How much assistance do we give to homeowners and builders, or are they on their own to try to figure this out?
They would hire a firm, like an archaeological firm, like one that pops in my head is like Tracker, or there's
And
many
I
other
think
ones.
that, back when this started, I had said, can we offer them a list of, and I know we don't want to say we're endorsing a certain firm, but I think to have a list of, so.
We have that list now that we
Okay.
do
More
for
generally.
subdivisions, that we
Okay.
give out.
Good.
So we have that, and so.
And then that firm can help walk them
That
through
firm would
this.
say, you know what, let's do our little grid, we're gonna do the shovel pit test. And we can give you copies of these reports if you're not familiar with them. Like, have you guys ever seen them before? So we do this for subdivisions, but they do these shovel pits. They actually go out, and this was the recommendation of the archaeologist, Joanna McLean, because she said, the best way to know, because I was saying, well, they could do the ground penetrating radar or whatever, or what about that? And she had said to me, the best thing is to just go look. And that's what the Phase 1B, and actually they're cheaper than those instruments. So, I mean, they could do the other one, but you don't know what you're seeing, so you still have to go dig then. So you paid for that, and then you have to go check it out. If it's a root or something and you don't know, the standards would still say, well, dig down and investigate.
It's a tool to substantiate a suspicion of something, or.
Right, but the way that it works, these firms go out, they set up their test grids, they dig little shovel pit tests, and they look, and then they say, whether they found anything, they can make conclusions in the report, and the report gets submitted. So it's fairly straightforward and relatively easy for someone to just call up an archaeological firm and have them do these reports. And it's commonplace here, at least for subdivisions, we do this now. So people are familiar with it, and we review them.
Yeah, East Hampton has something similar to this.
Very similar, same idea.
I like the way this flows, because it doesn't doesn't create another obstacle, just, you're using the system that's already in place to get to a good outcome. And
Right, well, we worked a lot on like just the process flow of how this is gonna work and who gets it and then how long do they have it and then what do they do when they're done and where does it go? And just to make sure that everybody knows what to do. And so when somebody's not, people just want to get their permit and get what they need to do and go on. But we can't do that, issue a permit if there's truly a likelihood that we don't want them to get to the point where they start digging for a pool and find something. We really don't. We
Right, we're
wanna
trying to
try
avoid it.
avoid that. So-
Yeah, and it
That's
doesn't
the whole
allow
point
for
of the law.
an infield sort of decision that's not really based on a process that's in place.
Are there notice,
And yeah, and like you said, it's been done in East Hampton, so this is tested and tried and true, so we know that it works.
and the notice requirements are kind of in step with the process of getting permits? In other words, the notice requirement to the nation, would that be at the same time as other notice requirements to neighbors and things like that?
Well, there aren't any noticing requirements for a building permit.
Okay, right, it's only if you get variances that,
Right.
Correct.
to do that, so that
We're
would,
the planning board, so this does allow for a notice requirement that has not been done before.
okay.
To the nation.
Yes.
And it's to make them aware of any public hearings or building permit, okay.
Well, just basically that the notice is that there's been a site disturbance plan filed.
Okay.
And that, I have a pending building permit application and the nation can come and look at that. They're welcome to look at it. And when we get the actual archaeology report, the planning department will send that to them. So they're being notified on two fronts, from the homeowner, property owner, and given a report that they can keep in their archives.
So again, on the map, and I did this one tweak here, so number 3 has a set of rules that's sort of unique. Number 4 has a set of rules. Everything else is you have to be within 500 feet
Correct.
of a known find. Okay, including the cemeteries and everything on this map.
Well, cemeteries, if you're within 20 feet
Oh, within 20 feet.
on that property.
All right, if you're within 20 feet on the cemetery property and everywhere else except for 3 and this modified 4, if you're within 500 feet of a known find. Okay, so, and then 3 and 4 pretty much match the moratorium, a little more stringent with 3 because it's not just new home construction, it's excavation above 50 cubic yards. And 4 is pretty much the same as the moratorium was on Sugarloaf. Any excavation is going to trigger archaeology. All right,
So I just one last question, and maybe if there isn't a quick answer, tell me, and I'll come see you. If somebody does this and discovers that there are archaeological remains, what happens then? How is this amended to consider that as far as the distances that we're talking
human
about?
remains or cultural resources?
Well, either one.
So that's phase 2. So if you do have that, you see site evaluation, and it's basically to obtain detailed information on the integrity, limits, structure, function, cultural, historical context of an
No,
archaeological site.
maybe I'm not asking.
To evaluate its potential national register.
Yeah, I don't think I'm asking the
of
question
cultural
properly. If we change the relationship of some of these areas by a discovery of some kind that may be significant, let's say it's human remains, what happens?
Well, now that gets noticed as another site that has a.
And you have to,
500-foot boundary.
and do that whole
And that
boundary and
gets
do all
plotted
that.
as a
And you're going
known
to plot
site.
that in there.
Correct.
So, and you're
The
set up to
1A
do
would be
that.
updated.
Sorry, I didn't
Okay.
understand.
No, I didn't ask the question well.
Yeah.
I thought you meant what happens to the
But
person.
at the same time, if human remains are found for that homeowner, builder, whatever it is, that triggers the other law that we passed.
Right, the grave
Which is
protection
reference-
act.
That's
already in
Protection
place.
Act.
That's
And now
already-
they have to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
through that whole process, which
Basically
includes
stop
possible
work order.
preservation.
Yeah, everything stops.
Yeah. If you're finding just simply evidence of habitation, and we know Shinnecock's were living throughout this area, and there may be, evidence found, whether it adds to the body of knowledge, is it important, is it a fort area, is it an encampment, some place where somebody stopped and, it was, 8 ate a few meals or something, there are different levels of importance, and that I'll leave to the archaeologists to say that, yes, we need to do something here to protect this, or we already have enough of that type of information, that go ahead and do your construction. If we said we're not going to develop any land where Shinnecock indigenous people roamed, we wouldn't be developing anywhere, because they were everywhere, you know?
Just one quick question. So on
Just because
area
you find an
C,
arrowhead doesn't make it archaeologically important, just where an arrow was shot at a deer.
Right, and that's why they have these data recovery and site evaluations, and it really gets into like, is this something that is a national register importance, and there's factors related to that, like, does it rise to the level of, those kinds of things, and
Yeah, I
that's
guess
all laid out.
I
It
guess
gets-
that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it does have that it built into the standards of like, when does it rise to the point where, it's on the national register.
And this is similar to East Hampton Town. Are there other towns in the state that have laws like this?
No. I don't
Is
think
this-
so, no.
Okay.
no, apparently New York State is way
Woefully
behind the curve in
deficient.
terms of
Yeah.
having any sort of graves protection or archaeological protection.
Yeah.
Wow.
When I spoke with the folks up in the state, they'll readily admit that. It's been
It's
pending
It's really
legislation for
disrespectful to
years.
the indigenous people of the region to not have a law like this, I think. I think it makes sense. It's about preserving our history and learning from the past. It's really not onerous what we're asking people to do. You're building a $500,000 house, yes, you might have to spend a couple thousand on archaeology, just to make sure that in the process of building that house, you're not disturbing, somebody's ancestors
Right.
in their
Exactly.
final resting place.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Seems reasonable.
does seem reasonable to me. I mean, I wouldn't want to build a house unless I understood that.
Well, yeah, we certainly would not allow somebody to build a house over a cemetery, right? I mean, that's a given. So it's just the burial practices were different for the Shinnecock. They didn't set up, these tightly clustered cemeteries. They buried on various hilltops, and, to be respectful of that, the indigenous people really have to, craft something like what we've crafted.
Right, and the more, there's still the ongoing preservation side of things that is ongoing. So the more the town preserves, like you just did with these sites that are important, that's happening still. None of that is going away. So all of that is still taking place at the same time.
Yeah.
Right, we've still targeted this area,
Right.
the Shinnecock Hills area, for preservation. I think it's one of our, if not our top priorities.
Right. So I think that's important to note, that the preservation
Alright.
efforts are still on.
So, all right, so you guys have some minor tweaking to do. There is a section you didn't fill out, the authority section.
Yeah, sometimes there's special language, we just want to make sure we get that right. If you could give us that
Sure.
municipal home rule.
Right.
All right, and then.
Caveat.
And then, and then this shift here
Yep.
to the map, and then
And
the
you're gonna look at
reference
the
to
50,
utilities that John mentioned.
Impossible depth.
And the depth, we'll find
Depth,
some
we-
standards and talk about that.
Yeah,
You can look at that. And what's our timeline here?
We can put it on, as fairly quickly for like the second meeting in September or
Sounds
something.
good to me.
Okay, great.
Did you confer at all with Joanne McLean?
I did, we did, and Dave actually spoke to her. She apologized, she could not come. She had some a previous engagement, but she spoke to Dave.
I talked to her the other day, and I got an email today.
Yeah, so she's been very helpful with writing the standards for the code.
Well, good.
We worked together on that.
I know in her world,
Dave's
it's-
been
she
majorly helpful, huge to really
She would
bring
probably
this
like to
together.
see these standards apply throughout the town rather than these specific areas. I think she'd like something broader, but I think this is a good start.
Okay.
yeah, I think it's a good model to do exactly that. We have huge history and cultural diversity here that we haven't really looked at in many ways.
And the Graves Protection Act does apply throughout the town.
Yes,
You know, If you encounter likely human remains, you must stop work and you must go through that process. So that's everywhere, not just these areas.
Right, so just to be clear, we're going to expand out the moratorium areas to reflect the 1A and put the overlay district in these locations.
Okay,
Okay?
all right,
Sounds
thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, we're gonna, Janice, you're up for the
I'm
next
still here,
one
yeah,
too. But Dave, you
I
can
actually asked
go.
Marty to join me. if you
He's
don't
right
mind.
behind you.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, Marty, come on up.
Hey, Marty.
Hey, Marty.
Mr. Shea?
All right, we are switching to town-wide tree clearing issue. And we're joined by Janice again, our Town Planning and Development Administrator, and Marty Shea, our Senior Environmental Analyst. And Janice,
Yeah, so we just wanted to bring this to your attention. Maybe you've been reading articles in the paper, but there's been a lot of consternation lately, especially, in this post-COVID influx of just a lot of vegetation clearing going on, and a lot of upset people calling up and saying, what is going on, and nobody even told me, and this, or I drove by and the whole site was cleared, and we know we have aquifer protection overlay, and those standards are very clear for the aquifer protection overlay areas for the aquifer. All trees matter, not just for the aquifer, but just in terms of our character, the benefit of trees as they exist to give us oxygen, their important habitat. So we're just kind of feeling around, and Councilman Scavone talked to me about this, and we want to bring this issue to the forefront, and this is something we need to really think about. And Marty did some research on what do they do in our neighboring townships. Maybe we can look at, some more standards in terms of.
I know East Hampton has some rules on the book.
Yeah, we don't
that
have
apply
any
across,
real.
I think anything over a
Tree clearing
quarter acre
Tree
lot.
clearing limit, like we do when it comes to doing a SWIP or over an acre, you're in engineering realm then. But when it comes to just, knowing that, over the summer, it sticks with me, this woman who called, she was caring for her parents who were dying of cancer, the chainsaws are going. It just makes me upset thinking about it, because she was hysterical. Because it meant something to her,
Yeah, sure.
Right.
So,
I know East Hampton, we struggled with this back when I was there too, because there was no clearing restrictions outside of those aquifer protection overlay districts, and people were pretty upset with people with a 1 acre lot would just clear the whole thing, and I don't remember exactly what we ended up adopting, but I think if you had more than a half acre lot, there were limits as to how many trees you could cut.
right, or even also just notifying your neighbors, or that this is happening. I mean, somebody might have an event planned, and the next thing you know, you're rolling up with the
I don't-
chainsaws, and there's this
I
disconnect
don't
there.
think we applied it to commercial properties, but I think, apply it to residential. Marty, do you?
Yeah, East Hampton has actually had clearing restrictions in place since 2004. The clearance standards differ according to the area. They created certain harbor overlay districts that are more environmentally sensitive, where the restrictions are a little bit more stringent. They have something similar to our aquifer protection overlay district. But with the exception of very small lots, their clearance standards do apply townwide, and that's been since about 2004. Brookhaven has approached it a little bit differently. Outside of the central Pine Barrens area, they have a tree preservation ordinance that actually requires you to get a special permit from the planning board if you have a property that's 2 acres or larger, wherein a staff member goes out and looks at the trees once a building permit has been issued, and works with the landowner to do what they can to salvage trees. Of course, exceptions are made where there are hazard trees. They also have provisions for designating spectacular trees as landmark
Like
trees.
old growth things, I think we talked about.
Heritage trees,
Heritage
yeah.
trees.
Some of the areas in this town that are getting especially impacted are areas, of course, outside of the APOD, north of Noyak Road. We had an area just recently off of Newtown Road where the property owner had merged several properties to build a big estate. And because the property, it's waterfront, but because it's bulkheaded, permitting ability is confined to 50 feet. And he's cleared about 7 acres of mature woodlands. You've probably seen this, Julie, creating dust storms, creating all kinds of
Oh, we
issues
got a lot of
for the
complaints about that one.
neighbors.
It's across from Channing Cross, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
On Newtown?
exactly. So, and this is a property that falls through the cracks. You know, if a property is subdivided, you know, we can impose restrictions even if you're outside of the APOD. But there
But
is
if it's a
still.
large lot, yeah.
Yeah,
And these
so-
large lots are like, you know, as more density and development comes in, you're crowding out habitat also, northern long-eared bat, or the, you know, creatures and, you know, the natural world
So what
is
are you-
getting a smaller
what are you
area.
trying- Are you gonna recommend something?
Yeah, we would like to get your, you know, okay, and move forward. I want to bring
You know,
forward
the
some.
devil's in the details. you
Yes,
know,
some
I-
legislation.
Right.
I think I have, you know, some,
I would imagine sometimes the zoning board will grant, you know, setback relief if somebody's trying to avoid a spectacular tree or something, trying to save a tree already, right? They must do that sometimes.
They do take that into
Well-
consideration.
but when the building department, like the limits of clearing, really trying to get like the inspectors to go and inspect like the limits of clearing or to have them marker out the trees. But, you know, the guy, then it's always the story where nobody told the guy with the bulldozer this, and he rolls
Or
up
the
and,
neighbor next door.
you know, and so that's where we're really missing,
And if
like,
some of these
you know.
modular
Right.
homes, they have to take all the trees down just to get the pieces in.
One of the-
Big pieces.
One of the public services that my office offers is that we go out and meet with landowners who contact us and are interested in taking down trees too, even if it's outside of these restricted areas, in order to educate them and advise them as to which trees are potential hazard trees that should be removed. Oftentimes, these are areas that are impacted by southern pine beetle as well. And once we take the time to meet with the individual landowner, it usually makes a big difference in terms of the actual tree cutting that occurs. But that's done on a piecemeal basis, and I'm going out there without any regulations in hand, just to encourage them to do the right thing. So.
All right.
So we clearly need something, and I thank you for coming in here. You and I had many conversations about this. This came about because of a number of different events outside the APOD that were clearing events, and they were not necessarily clearing for structures either. They were just, clearing to, I don't know, get it done or whatever they were doing, because they wanted the lot clear possibly for the future or something. So we wanted to research to see what we can put in place so that the town and the neighbors and everyone could be aware of what is going on,
I mean, I think one of the things you want to keep in mind at the same time is to make sure that any new regulations are simple and they're consistent and they're easily understood. If it was the will of the board to consider expanding upon the clearance standards that we have in the APOD right now, I think you'd probably want to consider going with the same standards, so we don't create this confusion in terms of new regulations.
Many of the villages have these standards in the town.
Yeah, Village in North Haven, for one.
And Janice, we had talked about this in the past, so there would be like possibly tree preservation for residential, but also clearing restrictions for commercial. Are you thinking of doing both of those?
I think we should, yeah. And just,
I don't think
just
East
kind of-
Hampton, I don't think did commercial. It's complicated because
It depends
You need
on
the
where the
whole-
commercial
you need
is.
the
I mean,
whole
there's
lot.
some areas of Speonk that it's
just-
nice to have that
it was too
buffer
onerous.
also in the
I
front.
mean, you have all the parking requirements and all this other stuff, it just doesn't really work.
We can take a look at it.
I think you
in-
should look at it.
In our corridor study for, even in Hampton Bays, there's a requirement, like you notice where Stop and Shop is, there's like those woods in front, and that was done intentionally and actually is supposed to keep
Well,
going.
screening
So
is
when it comes
fine.
to the commercial properties along a visual corridor, sometimes you do want some native.
But also the
Planning board's
intent
gonna
of
require
that.
screening.
Yeah, planning board will require that anyway. So I think we're really talking about residential right now. What the real issue is so many people calling up and going, I love those trees, and they just took them all down, and they're gone. And now what? I've got this guy right there, and there's no buffer, and what
And
am
now
I,
the
you know?
deer are living in my
And
front
now this and
yard.
that, and you know, Hampton Bay Civic has been talking about this for a long time. The sustainability has been talking about this for a long time. You know, so it's just time. I just want to alert you that we want to do this and bring it forward.
Yeah, I would also, but I would like you to look at the commercial side of things in particular, because it's not commercial as we might think of it, somebody wants to build a warehouse, but commercial that might be applications for ag districts and other kinds of things. Those are, they're making money off of those properties, and I want to be sure that, you know, that we have some kind of standard that for clearing in place, even for that type of commercial use.
Sure.
I agree.
And then if you look at possible expansion of the APOD restrictions, there are really no areas of this town that are not critical in terms of watershed areas for the Peconic and South Shore Bays. So
Right.
as Janice said, indicated in her introduction, trees are important for so many reasons, not only to keep our groundwater and our air pure, but to maintain our scenic character, to retain our real estate values, to provide wildlife habitat. You know, there's, you know, if you look at areas like Shinnecock Hills is an area that's so critical in terms of aquifer protection and protection of the bays, but it's outside of the APOD. So there are some very significant areas that need to be addressed. And then we have clearance standards in the coastal erosion hazard areas and adjacent areas that possibly need to be amended because in setting those standards, they were consistent with the APOD standards, but they didn't exclude existing beach areas. So oftentimes the oceanfront property owner can meet the site disturbance limitations by just leaving his beach alone, which he's not going to touch anyway, and then he can still clear the remainder of that coastal vegetation that's
In terms of percentage of clearing, right?
Yeah, you can't count
Right.
the.
And that
existing-
coastal vegetation is so important, migrating swallows, monarch butterflies, to just, you know, protection of the character of a waterfront, and as shore protection,
Yeah,
so.
that's for
And Marty,
erosion especially.
excessive clearing in the town, it affects biodiversity of, you know, the species throughout the town,
Absolutely.
coastal, inland, and I know that's, you know, that's throwing off our ecosystem now.
It's always odd to me when I see these houses along the ocean where they have these beautiful dune ecosystems, and then they have green lawns.
Yeah.
Right up to them.
Privet hedges.
You know, in East Hampton, actually, where we changed a lot of that, so you couldn't do that. You had to use the native, you know, ecosystems there. They're so much nicer looking to me to have those sweeping dunes and the bearberry and, you know,
Absolutely.
beach plum and, you know, the indigenous vegetation. To me, they're aesthetically much more pleasing than a homogeneous green lawn that has to constantly be, you know,
Rolling in
treated with
nitrogen.
pesticides.
We had one where they
You know.
were gonna roll out a
And
sod.
then these, it's really out of place.
Yeah.
Well, it also
Those
has,
homes
it
in
has
the-
this other problem where
Yeah,
when
go through the
they go
bees.
away, it allows our invasive species to thrive.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem.
Absolutely.
Having been out there trying to pull 3 mile,
Right.
minutes
Mile
an
a
hour,
minute,
yeah, whatever. it
And
is.
they.
Mile a minute?
and
Mile a
mile a
minute.
minute.
But they grow like 3 miles a minute.
Yeah.
3 Mile Harbor?
And also introduces, like, you're spending millions on removing nitrogen, don't forget. So putting these, you know, other things out there that,
Yeah, trees remove nitrogen too.
yes.
Yeah.
They sequester carbon from the air and help
that's another
combat
I think they
global
help
warming.
lower the temperature too.
And then
Yes,
that green
absolutely.
lawn just takes all the
particularly on a
moisture right back
hot day
again.
like today. It's nice to get some shade.
Yeah.
Know that at my own home. So glad to get home and be under the shade of the trees where it's nice and cool.
Great, so we're gonna be, I just
Why
wanted
don't
to
you
bring.
come up with something
Thank
for
you.
us to look at?
Yes.
And,
We
We
didn't
have
want to
some
just
ideas,
roll
yeah.
up with a code and be like, here's the code, but we have a lot of ideas
I
and
think
together.
I'm certainly inclined to consider something. I need to see what the details are, because I don't want to create something too onerous on people trying to develop small lots.
Right.
You know, So, and that's sort of how we resolved this in East Hampton, is we exempted a lot of the smaller lots and the commercial properties.
Well, I agree with Marty that expanding the APOD areas would be the easiest way, and also adding some like heritage tree.
Well, that's been a big discussion in our sustainability committee, is the preservation of heritage tree protections for a whole bunch of reasons, which take us hours to go through, and why that's so important.
But also with the APOD, just so you know, it's also manipulated where people clear and then come in and go, I need to do a site disturbance plan because I just cleared everything out. And that's also disturbing and disheartening because there's not a lot of penalties associated with that. And so we just need to change the culture of, it is easier to ask for permission and better to just ask to do it and come in and show us your plans versus come back on the other side and say,
And have to
"Oops,
revegetate
sorry,
and
I'll
go
just
through all that."
revegetate." And then, we spend quite a bit of time
And
with these
And they
revegetation
consider it a
plans.
cost
We'll
of
look
business.
forward to what you come up with.
Okay,
All right?
great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your
Thanks a
time.
lot.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next on the agenda is just updates. So I've got a few. I'll start, if you don't mind. So we'll start with COVID. Delta variant. There still is COVID in the community. The numbers have come down a little bit. They sort of peaked, and we were seeing like 20, 24 a day. Now they're back down to about 17 a day townwide. We had one day that they were very low, but that was preceding everything was closed for Hurricane Henry. So not a lot of people got tested on that particular Sunday. But the numbers have either stabilized or trending downward. That's a good sign. The hospital has had a number of COVID patients. I'm being told that everyone who has ended up in the hospital with COVID was unvaccinated. So it's just one more reminder to people that the vaccines do work. And, I and many others would encourage people to get vaccinated. I know we're going to end up doing boosters before you know it, as the immunity you get, or relative immunity, starts to wear off after a certain amount of time. Segueing into Hurricane Henri, I did speak about this at the town board meeting 2 nights ago, so I'm not going to go through that again. We got pretty lucky in terms of the storm moving to our east and weakening in strength. We had prepared for a Category 1 hurricane. It was a good drill and preparedness. It sort of tested our ability to ramp up quickly with resources and people for a catastrophic event. I think across the board, I was very pleased with the response, particularly the leadership of our police chief and our Chief Skrnicki and our public safety director, Ryan Murphy. At least I have some comfort in knowing if we do get another forecast for a Category 1 hurricane, that we've sort of run this drill and successfully. So the next thing I'll mention, South Fork Commuter Connection, September 7th, it returns. We had a special meeting earlier today to award the bid for the shuttle bus to Hampton Hopper. So that will take care of that last mile. And the schedule is out there. I think we may have linked it up on our town website. But if somebody wants to get the schedule, I'm sure if they go to Long Island Railroad, they can get it. And we'll try to get it available. We have copies, so we can always contact my office. we encourage people to use this service. My concern is if not enough people use it, they'll take it away. It is really critical that this service is there and it's allowed to grow over time. I know some employers may have to tweak their schedules a little bit because there's no perfect train schedule that's going to work for everyone. It might get to Montauk at whatever, 9:15, or let's see what the time is, 9:19 it gets to Montauk. Businesses want to open at 9, maybe some of them can tweak their opening times a little bit to allow their employees to get there. So the first train out of Spionk is 6 in the morning, 6:16, and arriving in Amagansett at 7 o'clock, 7:08, less than an hour from Spionk to Amagansett. Try that by car. You can go from Hampton Bays, you can get on an 8:26 train and be to work, or be at the Southampton train station at 8:36, 10 minutes later. Good luck doing that by car, right? 10 minutes from
Any
Hampton
day.
Bays to Southampton, and over an hour by car. So it's really, if you can make it work, and talk to us too. Like, I know for some people, it's not perfect, or they might need to, some equipment on this side of the canal somehow, where, I know we're talking about those kinds of things, where maybe places where you can leave a commercial truck with all your equipment and then take the train and we'll get you to your truck using the shuttle. So there's got to be ways to do that. We'll take people to their place of employment. So if you're leaving your truck at your construction site, that might be a way to do it. We'll just try to work with us, we'll work with you, and we'll try to get as many cars off the road as we can. And that's going to segue into my next thing, which is the blinking light program, which is also designed to help traffic move along. And I think today may be the last day, and I know a lot of people are going, oh no, you need to keep that going. And I will talk to Chief Skrnicki about that. It's working. We're only blinking the one light at Canoe Place Road, and I had somebody in my office, I think yesterday, saying, one of the town employees here, saying we've cut an hour off of her commute, or at least 45 minutes. Dramatic changes. Now, I don't know if that's all attributed to the blinking light, or maybe there's been a slowdown in traffic. The chief sends me drone video pretty much every day. It's flowing. A lot less traffic on Fanning, on Canoe Place Road. That backlog is gone. It's gone, and traffic is moving. Sometimes it backs up at St. Andrews or the college, and that backup can be, for miles. But blinking Canoe Place Road seems to be working. Now, I did get one complaint from one company that the elimination of that U-turn is causing difficulty for their drivers. But other than that, it all seems to be positive. So it sounds like we may be onto something. I know once they stop blinking it, the phone's going to be ringing now going, can you start blinking it again? We're looking into also blinking the Watermill light. I expect that to happen soon in the mornings. And maybe the St. Andrews light, I talked to the chief about this yesterday. Maybe the St. Andrews light we can blink in the afternoons, because the westbound traffic is so bad, you can't, it backs up straight through the village here. And it's backing up all the side roads, like Ox Pasture. Everybody's like looking for all these ways around that Hill Street backup. You guys too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Ox Pasture, is that the name of the street? Yeah.
All those streets.
All those streets. So blinking in the afternoon, St. Andrews light, which is a relatively new light, I think that's feasible, and that could eliminate some of that backup on Montauk Highway. Yeah, it's really bad.
That's a half hour, 40 minutes from
So,
there.
yeah, so it's worth trying. So, and the chief has also been talking about Route 24, blinking some of those lights in the morning. It's easier to blink lights in the morning than the afternoon, Because that period from 5:30 to 7:30, a lot of the businesses are not open. In the afternoon, everything's open, and people need to make left turns, and it's just far more complicated. But luckily, in the afternoons, not everybody typically goes home at the same time. But the Hill Street backup has been brutal. So if we can get St. Andrews blinking in the afternoon, that could help. And weren't we putting together like a committee to, yeah, we haven't had a meeting yet. We did pass a resolution to create a traffic solutions committee. Yeah, we haven't had a first meeting of that, so I need to talk to the police chief about that. You're on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to look into that, getting that jump started? I know you're a busy man, but, all right. Okay, so that's that. We had an audit advisory committee the other day. That went really well. Tommy John, you were sat in on that. And Rick, were you on that meeting too, audit advisory? We talked about LoSAP audits. So we've completed now a review of all the LoSAP programs, which is a great program for volunteers, fire and ambulance. Once they get service credit and it becomes a pension benefit. It's minor, it's like $20 a month for each year they qualify. They have to put in a certain amount of time to qualify.
50 points a year.
50 points a year.
50 points a year.
So, but this audit advisory committee is doing a great job, and we just, sort of look at different aspects that affect the town's finances and make sure that, everything is proper. Rick and I participated in Hampton Bay's Civic Zoom type of meeting. It's a different platform than Zoom the other day. Had some audio issues in the beginning, but it was a helpful meeting. It was lots of questions about the future of downtown Hampton Bays, and what the next steps are, and we remain committed to working with the community on creating zoning for downtown that is in line with its vision for the future, that will spur investment into downtown Hampton Bays, and address some of the traffic issues, et cetera, and environmental issues. So I think on the whole, the meeting went pretty well. We were able to answer a number of questions. Janice was there as well. I continue to work on the budget for next year. I may be getting some good news from the Comptroller's office. Julie made me aware that the Comptroller may be adjusting the pension contribution numbers slightly downward. I haven't got that yet. That'll provide some relief if that's the case.
I saw that in the news thing. There was an article in the news.
Yeah, it kept referencing 2023, though.
There've
so
been a couple of articles about
2023, it doesn't really do much for my budget.
Right.
So I'm doing the budget for 2022.
Right.
And the pension contribution are way up, and that's making it a harder budget to keep taxes low. And we still have the market trend freeze, which means that property values, if you haven't done any work on them, are likely below fair market value in terms of what they're assessed at. So, there's inflation, there are contractual raises, and makes it very hard to not raise the tax rate. Doing my best, but it's a complicated year. I'm hoping for, at least in the general fund, that we don't see any increase in the tax rate. Yet to be seen. But the budget, is a lot. It's a lot of work, a lot of number crunching, a lot of departments, and you just saw the census, and I didn't bring the numbers with me. And I would like actually at some point to talk about the census, but we've had a significant increase in population. We went from 56,000.
1.6%. Yeah.
Was that
Yeah, it's over
21.6% increase in population?
and it's a big change in demographics,
And
too.
I think a lot of it is relatively recent, too, because of COVID. The pandemic, people have relocated out here, and it's naive to think that we can address all the community needs. Oh, Jackie's bringing me census data. it would be naive to think that we could meet all the community demands for town services without some increases in personnel. It just, and so a lot of departments are coming to me saying, we need more people. We cannot meet the level of service that the residents demand without additional staff. So this is a complicated budget. I will tell you, it's a complicated budget because of all these factors. There's some things that are going in our favor, but there are also things that are not in our favor. So Jackie brought me some of the micro data from the census. It's hard to sort of follow all this, but I can look at a couple things. So change in population by area. So that's like Bridgehampton, 68% increase in population. East Quogue, 40% increase, no, sorry, that's 16% increase. Eastport, 21, Flanders, 14%. Hampton Bays was up by 11.9%. Actually, less than the town numbers.
What was the Bridgehampton number?
68.
Bridgehampton, 68.2
Percent increase.
in population, yeah.
Okay.
North Haven, 39.5. Northampton, 33.9, almost 34%. Quogue, 24. Quogue Village, 71.9. Remsenburg, 17.7. Riverside, down by 1%. Actually lost population. Sag Harbor Village, 27.8. Sagaponack. Now, percentages are funny, because if you start with a low base,
I was just going to say.
if you have only a few people living there, and so they went up by 146%, their population.
Yeah, these are second homeowners identifying their,
Right, who have,
They're changing their.
Shinnecock Hills, only 4% increase. Let's see, Southampton Village, 46% increase. Tuckahoe, 9.6. Watermill, 60.7. West Hampton Dunes Village, again, this is a very low base here, but 129% increase. West Hampton, 17.6. West Hampton Beach Village, 24.9. Now, I also, I have the breakdown in terms of ethnicity and things like that, but, so we now have a total, do you have it there, there's 69,000 people. Personally, I think we have more people than that.
Yeah, me too.
I think we have substantially, certainly in the summertime, we have more people, but I think our year-round population is 100,000, maybe more. And if we can, why is the census still wrong? Partially because, you're sort of reporting where you were April 1st of 2021, and I think a lot of people came out here after that point. So, and I still think there's people who haven't been counted. It's hard to judge because we don't have a good metric. We could look at our crime rate, we could look at our electrical consumption, we could look at our traffic. That's another complexity, is the number of people who say this is where they live isn't the same as how many people are here, because our workforce is here. So like at noon on a given day, you have all the people who say they live here, and then you have all the people who work here. So the effective, I can't really call it population, but the effective number of people who are here, it's probably triple these numbers. And so in terms of protecting public safety, yeah, we have to protect the workers who are commuting through our area as well. So it creates challenges for our police and fire and ambulance and everything else. So, it's for us as the town government to, recognize that the amount of people that we're responsible for probably far exceeds these numbers. Though we're often treated like a pretty small town at, 50, 60,000 people. When you add everybody up, right now, if you counted the number of people who are here at this hour on a weekday in August, there's probably 300,000 people in the town of Southampton. Between visitors, you know, year-round people, summer people, all their guests, all the people who are working in this area. Yeah, we probably have 300,000 people here.
Well, as a
If we
point
had
of
to
reference-
evacuate, that's how many people we have to get out of here.
As a point of reference, Binghamton has about 35,000 people, the city of Binghamton. Albany has 97,000 people,
Yeah.
right? The town of Southampton, 69,000 year-round, plus everything you just said, Supervisor.
Yep, exactly. All right, the last thing I'll mention, there is a concert tonight, Good Ground Park. Should be fun, should be a nice night. Band's not too shabby. We'll find out. You guys can judge, but I am performing with a quartet tonight, mostly rock and roll, all original, almost all original music. So I hope you enjoy it if you come out to Good Ground Park tonight. All right, who wants to go next? Tommy John?
Sure. Sure. Yeah, those population numbers, I think, are somewhat staggering, and it's certainly going to weigh on the town as far as delivering services. Okay, we'll digest that. You mentioned the Audit Advisory Committee, Jay, and we did audit our ambulance for LoSAP, and we did this in order to provide guidance to them. The town also has provided LoSAP training for their officers so that they know how to institute the state law. There's very strict laws on how LoSAP is awarded, so we want to make sure that you know they know what they're doing, and they do a good job. The audit came out pretty well. The South Fork Commuter Connection, I've been working with Tom Neely. The first thing that we did was we looked at the major employment areas and their shifts and, you know, who's working where, and we were seeing if the trains would match up with the bus system, and we are going to be coming out with a schedule for the bus loop probably early next week. As soon as we can hammer that out, we will have it. And again, 10 minutes between Hampton Bays and Southampton by train. Can't say it enough. I think that's good.
That says it
Also,
all.
yeah, you know, there are bike rental stations in Southampton at the train station. You can get on a bicycle if you want. We have bike lockers at Bridgehampton Station. We're looking to get a bike rental terminal at Bridgehampton as well. That's actually in the plan, and it's going to be there pretty soon from Pedal Share. It's kind of in the plan. Also, the Aircraft Noise Advisory Committee, we have been studying air noise over the town of Southampton and other towns throughout the summer this year, and we're going to be concluding that research in the coming weeks, and we're going to be coming to the board to let you know what we found out here and to update the board with what's coming up on that. Other than that, I'm good.
Thank you.
I know you have a sound check, so I'm going to defer for this week.
All right, good. Well, thank you. Rick?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you said about the Civic Association meeting on Monday. I really want to thank you and Janice coming out and making the Hampton Bays community a little clearer on what the intention of the original overlay district is and where we move from here. You know, Hampton Bays deserves to have a nicer downtown, some investment made into its downtown. And I'm looking forward to the public meetings that are coming up. I'm hoping that the public does come out for them. They understand what the original plan was trying to do and where we go from there. So I appreciate everybody being there, Janice especially. Poor Janice has put a lot of heart and soul into it, and it's much appreciated. On the population end, just a quick thing, you know, Hampton Bays, 11% sounds like we are not doing as well as everybody else, but that's well over 1,000 people in Hampton Bays. You know, we have a pretty big community already. That's another 1,000 people going to drugstore, eating out, you know, trying to get to work, enjoying our beaches. It does weigh on.
Remember,
the town
it's
resources
over a decade. though.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's
100 a
still,
year,
yeah, it still adds to that
Yeah,
community.
absolutely.
So I appreciate that. And last but not least, the park, the Good Ground Park Concert Series has been very well attended. It's been growing, so you better be on your game today. It will be,
I'll try
it
my
will
best.
get dark early.
I'm no Charlie Watts, but
And it will be hot, so please prepare yourself for that, but looking forward to it.
that's good. You know, on the census stuff, I did speak to Lars Clemenson. I mentioned this at the Civic, too, that the school population actually has stabilized.
Yes.
And they're, based on the birth rates, they're expecting their school population to go down, which hopefully will provide some relief in terms of property taxes, because that's a big piece of property taxes. But the incoming kindergarten class next year is substantially smaller than the outgoing graduating, high school class.
Correct.
And that's, and looking forward, that trend is continuing. So you may have some more people, but at least in terms of the school doesn't seem to be growing. So you're probably seeing more summer homes, that's what I
I
suspect.
think we're getting back to what we were in the 60s and 70s.
Yep. Yep, I know, I agree. All right, Julie, what you got?
Sure, I just want to reach out to anybody who may be experiencing food insecurity or know somebody who is. I want to remind you that we have little free food pantries, one at Crohan Center. I know that there's one at the Pocket Park in Hampton Bays. Please use the supplies that are there. Also, to anybody who's willing to donate to the food supplies for those little food pantries, please do so as well. We'd appreciate it.
Excellent. All right. So we do have some executive session items. We have land acquisition. We have confidential legal advice. We have personnel. So I'll make a motion to end our work session and go into the executive session on those items.
Second?
Seconded by Councilman Scavone. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.